All right, everybody. Week 2 of Eclipse.
Woo!
Wow.
Literally, I was gonna say that exactly. I started to. Can you tell we're related?
Oh, so funny. Okay, this week we read chapter 7 through 13 in Eclipse and watched a chunk of the movie.
And I was just telling Callie that the movie I did not do a great job on figuring out the exact timestamps, and there are some spoilers. So if you don't want to watch it because of that, there's that. But yeah. But it's still like I ended it where it ends with Jasper talking about his background story, which is why I ended it there. So
Right.
this movie just doesn't go in the same order. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I also did want to talk about before we get into it, that this week talks more about the Quileute tribe and their like legends and history and stuff. And I wanted to take the time to acknowledge the like kind of problematic portrayal, which I feel like is something we probably should have done a while ago, but so sorry about that. But I did some research on Stephenie Meyer's research. um, and she did some research on the tribe for her books, but didn't consult with any members of the tribe. And some tribe members have taken like problem with that. And just wanted to acknowledge that since she did like take their legends in history, but alter them for her own use, which she obviously does with vampire lore, but these are real people, so
Yeah.
um and they also didn't receive any like royalties from the money that was made and that sort of thing, and different portrayals of them like over cutting their hair or their tattoos. I learned in this research that they were designed by a non-native person for the movies and used other native tribes artwork, which is obviously problematic. So
Mhm.
I just wanted to acknowledge that before we talk more about the history. I also realized that I've said before that I would want a book going more into their background, and I'm like, that would just be more problematic, probably. So I don't know what I want the books to be now, but
Yeah, the story would be cool. Like, I still think that would be an interesting story, but it's very much about like how it's done, right? Like, and yeah, yeah. Classic, you know. What a
yeah,
time. There's a fair amount of problematic stuff in this section.
yeah,
TBH.
yeah.
There's also like a lot of like triggers. There's a lot of violence in this. Rosalie's story could be really triggering for people. Uh
Problematic stuff with Jasper's story.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Some stuff about how Charlie responds.
Mm,
Bella is pretty problematic in this
yeah.
section. Again, okay, I think this is like I am just not reading Twilight has not made me excited to do another book series that's an early 2000s book.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't think I've reread a lot of stuff from this time, and like rereading this, I'm like, man, some of this stuff actually makes me cringe, like
Yeah,
physically cringe.
yeah, same, same.
Like,
Yeah. We have thrown around the idea of keeping it a vampire themed podcast though, and just moving into some vampire lore.
I
Uh,
do. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I'll let you finish your thought.
and I've started a list of
Okay.
series, particularly with an interest in authors who have taken traditional vampire lore and like twisted it to be their own like take on vampires. Um, and George R. R. Martin, author of Game of Thrones, funder of Meow Wolf, how everyone knows him, um,
Obviously.
obviously, has a vampire series that apparently he does a lot of his own vampire lore, which I'm probably going to read after this either way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
didn't know that. Yeah.
anyway.
I was gonna say though, I did watch on Halloween at a friend's house. We watched What We Do in the Shadows, the movie, which I had never seen,
Yeah,
and is what the show is based off of. And
yeah,
I loved the movie. I've liked what I've seen of the show, but I also have a huge thing for Taika Waititi, so that
yeah.
was excellent. So
Yeah. Yeah. My brother and sister-in-law, Sophie and Ben, raved about the movie What We Do in the Shadows for years, like when we were in college, and thought it was literally the funniest thing. And I remember one of my like really good friends in college being like, I do not get their humor.
Yeah, it's definitely a different kind of humor, but I love
it's
it.
it's British, so it's very much like Monty Python vibes. Where the What We Do in the Shadows show is not as much like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, both good. Anyways, so feel free to send us other vampire series that have interesting takes on vampires.
yeah.
You know, since we're becoming disheartened with the early 2000s young adult literature.
We'll just go into vampires, steer a different direction. Callie
Yeah,
actually texted me a list the other week of like famous vampires, and I said that the ones I was most familiar with were Edward and Count Von Count from Sesame Street. So there's also a potential for a Sesame Street watch.
I would love to do a deep dive into Count Von Count. That's so weird. I would love it.
Mm,
Oh man. Okay. Well, now that we've given all the caveats, let's jump into a terrible story, aka chapter 7.
yeah,
Rosalie decides to share her story with Bella and her perspective on why Bella should stay human.
yeah, yep.
Woofda.
It's pretty heavy. So yeah. I don't know. Did you remember any of this or no?
None of it.
Oh, okay. I feel like I should probably have given you a warning because I remembered pretty much all of this, but
Yeah, I knew there was something obviously, like I knew the context of what her story was going to be in some ways because like obviously we already know from like earlier in the books that this is kind of what happens in some ways. Like we get a vague idea, but
yeah,
not as much like detail.
yeah.
Um yeah. So there's that. There's that. I also remembered zero of Jasper's story, like zero zero. So
Oh
what is
yeah. I remembered both of those because they're both in the movie, so there was bits that I forgot, but for the most part remembered it.
yeah, yeah. All right.
Which this
Well,
chapter, my first note on it is before Rosalie even starts telling Bella her background story and asks about what she knows about her story. And Bella says she doesn't know much. She knows that it's something similar to what happened to her in Port Angeles, but there was no one there to save her. And she's kind of surprised that that's all Edward told, which I feel like says something. I don't know exactly what it says, but the fact that Rosalie is surprised that he's withholding like any information. But also Bella makes a point to say that Edward doesn't like oversharing people's stories because obviously he gets a lot more insight to them being able to read people's minds. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. And Rosalie says she should like give Edward more credit
Hmm.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, my first note about Rosalie's story. So, to give a brief, quick overview without getting into like any graphic details, the book does not get very graphic at all. It definitely leaves you to fill it in. So, if you are a person who's like triggered, it's not like super super overt or
Yeah. It
anything.
is a YA novel. So
Yeah, it is. And not like how Throne of Glass is a YA novel. It's a real YA novel.
yeah. Like a
um,
teen novel, not a
like it actually is like, yeah, it's censored appropriately. Um, so uh, Rosalie shares basically how she was like a very beautiful, like upper class upbringing during the Great Depression, and how basically all she wanted was to marry like a rich man from a high status. And she wanted to be like a wealthy housewife. She wanted to have her own beautiful house, have kids, have a maid who did her work, live in a beautiful place. That's
Yeah.
kind of like everything she's wanting in life. Um, and she specifically, my first note that was really cringy for me, um, was saying how she liked that men's eyes followed her from the age she turned 12. Gross, 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 gross. Yeah. Um, she goes on to get engaged to like the wealthiest family who has a lot of control in their town, to his son. They get engaged super quickly in like 2 months. It's also important to note her best friend marries for love. She marries a carpenter, and Rosalie is very like has a lot of like love and admiration for the son that her best friend has, who has dark curly hair. Uh, Later, she is leaving her friend's house, and her fiance is wasted with his friends, and they've been waiting for her and attack and assault her and leave her for dead after like ripping all her clothes off. It's yeah, not not a good story. Carlisle comes to save her with Edward and Esme. I believe they're all together, or is it just Carlisle in that
No,
moment?
it's just Carlisle, and he brings her back to their house, I think, where Esme and Edward are.
Yeah. And then she just talks about remembering like Edward arguing a lot with Carlisle
Hmm.
uh, about bringing her and turning her, and how she is basically, I mean, it seems like Edward makes a good point in being like, what are you doing? This is like the hot socialite of the town who's engaged to the wealthiest family. She's obviously going to be recognized. We like have to leave now. Like,
Hmm.
yeah. So, um, there's that. Anything else you wanna share from Rosalie actually telling that part of the story up until her revenge plot begins?
I don't have a ton. I really only took notes on really specific information that she gave, which I noticed she was called Rosalie Hale when she was alive, and
Mm-hmm.
I was curious about the reason behind her keeping her last name because then Jasper is also Jasper Hale is when he comes in the family. So I was just curious about if she wanted to keep her last name and if it was like that from the beginning, or I was kind of curious about that, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I did also think it was interesting how self-aware she was, but is still very vain and acknowledges that. I think she actually uses that exact word when telling this story, talking about how vain she is. And I just feel like there aren't a lot of people out there who are aware of them being so vain and being like seemingly okay with it. So I just thought that was interesting and like shows some of her character. And she does seem to be like unapologetically herself most of the time. So,
Yeah. It
um,
also seems like when she tells this story, it's like almost like if like a grandma was talking about themselves as a teenager, where it's easier for you to be honest about like your flaws because you're so far removed from them time wise now, which Rosalie is, while also staying kind of the same age, you know?
Yeah, and also like I don't think she is like super removed from some of this stuff. I mean, obviously this specific story she is. It's been like 70 years, but um she talks about I believe it's in this chapter too that she talks about her initially not liking Bella because she was jealous of her because Edward was like into her.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously it is something that she obviously acknowledges that she still is vain. So
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the one other note that I have is after Carlisle finds her and begins to change her, she literally says that she begged for him to kill her. And I'm like, I don't love that Carlisle is turning her when she is literally begging for that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that Carlisle then kept justifying it to Edward, saying like it was such a waste, like
Yeah.
a waste of like life. And Edward was like, people die. Like that's part of life, you know?
Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear the story from Carlisle's perspective because I'm sure he has something to say about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like Carlisle had such an emotional response, like that he's trying to write like it was so unjust that she would have like died for like such a dumb, like horrific reason, you know? Like
Yeah.
it's not like sickness, it's not, it's just people being like evil. Um, and so I think it's like that like strong moral compass in that way that like convinced him to turn Rosalie, even though, yeah, I don't know. That's my theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I also had a note about the fact something that I completely forgot about is the fact that Rosalie has never tasted blood. She has never killed well, she killed we didn't talk about that after she turned. She went and killed her fiance and the people that attacked.
That's my next note. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and she talks about that those are the only people that she has killed, and she specifically did not like drink their blood when she killed them and was careful to not spill their blood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spent a weird amount of time thinking about how you would kill someone without making them bleed in any way.
Other than
Um,
poisoning, I really don't know.
yeah, you'd have to like break their neck, right?
Yeah, which I guess she could very plausibly do. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Um, anyways, she, in a real iconic horror movie kind of way, she decides to go murder all the men who did this to her. Um, and the two guards who are guarding her former fiance, kills all the dudes, kills the guard, and then goes to kill her fiance and like low key, not low key, actually torture him before he like dies. And she does so. She shows up in a wedding dress to do this, which is some horror movie icon.
yeah,
It's so dramatic, which she
it
even said
is.
in the book. But like in a great movie moment kind of way. So yeah, I thought that was crazy.
Yeah. I
Um,
also did have a note about like this whole kind of instance and in Twilight, Edward talks about how Rosalie's gift is her pig-headedness, but then when we read Midnight Sun, his perspective, he's actually lying about that and talking about how it's like her beauty or whatever. But this like whole section makes me think that like it is more like stubbornness that's her power because um with her turning and her deciding to like seek revenge on these people who attacked her and not having to like taste their blood. I feel like that takes a lot of control as a newborn vampire as we learn more about newborn vampires. And also the fact that she has gone like 70 years without doing that takes a lot of control. And I feel like it's her being stubborn about her not wanting to have been a vampire and to not like acknowledge really that she is one, you know?
yeah, yeah, it's almost like willpower or like
Yeah. And I said stubbornness because that was the word that stuck with me, but I feel like it is, yeah, willpower is a better thing to use for it being a power, you know, rather than a
right.
negative quality.
But it's definitely like just based on like her like willpower, but you're like kind of a selfish character
Yeah.
is interesting, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's not like she uses it like she's willing to kind of go against the whole family, you know, in the last book and be like isolated from everyone because of what she believes and she won't help and you know stuff like that. that makes me think like, yeah, it's her like willpower to do whatever she thinks is right or like she deems whatever, but it's yeah, like she's a selfish character. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um yeah, she talks about all this. She's telling Bella this, and talking about like this being like this nightmare. We already know from Twilight that Rosalie has a really negative self view, also. Her and Edward are the ones who view themselves really bad and like vampires being like really awful. And so Rosalie is kind of saying this, talking to Bella about why she should not become a vampire, not give that up. And Bella makes the point that I thought of also, which is like, but you got Emmett out of it. Like you found your person. And then Rosalie admits that she saved Emmett not because of some like bond that she felt, but because when she saw him getting attacked by the bear, he reminded her of Vera, her friend's little boy, because he had dark hair and like some like innocence to his face and things like that. And that's why she made Carlisle turn him, was out of this like desperation,
Mm-hmm.
that he reminded her of Vera's son. So yeah, I think that's really interesting because we had kind of assumed he was like her mate and she knew at that point. And she talks about like that's like her one like her like moment of real luck in life was that then he ended up being everything she wanted out of a marriage,
Mm-hmm.
you know, before.
She also does say during this when Bella talks about how she then found Emmett, she talks about that was only like half of her wishes in life though, and the other one was to have a baby. That was something so
Mm-hmm.
significant in this part as well. But
Yeah, and that like she will never be able to like get grow old with Emmett and be surrounded by like their grandchildren and things like that. And so she really asked Bella to think about all those moments that she will give up by becoming a vampire,
hmm
which we've talked about before, but I think this is like a good representation that it's like, I mean, as Americans, I think we celebrate being young, staying flexible, like all of those things are valued really highly in our society. We don't like age, particularly as women. And so I think it's actually interesting to have the character who is the most vain, who then becomes even more beautiful, gets to stay beautiful for forever, never has to age. And her real, like, sadness in life is that she actually won't grow old and have these moments with Emmett is really interesting, and that she is pushing Bella to not give that up. Yeah, I just think that's very interesting.
yeah, I do too. I hadn't really like reflected on it in that way. And I'm curious if she has always felt that way or something as like time has gone on, she has realized is something that she is missing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, okay. I don't know if you have anything else you want to share about Rosalie specifically. Otherwise, we can jump into the next day. Bella goes to school.
I'm good to jump.
Uh, cool. Not a ton happens at school except for the fact that suddenly there was a roar, and it
I
is
love
Jacob's
how
motorcycle.
I love how dramatic this moment is.
It is so dramatic. And he pulls up on his motorcycle and yells, "Run, Bella!" And when I read this, I did not think run to the motorcycle before Alice realizes it, Bella. I'm thinking imminent danger. Imminent
I
danger.
was also thinking that same thing and even remembered in this moment rereading this that this is what my initial reaction was when I first read this book. I remember being like, what is happening right now? Like
Yeah. It is not imminent danger. Jacob just wants her to run to his motorcycle, um, and like make an instant decision so Alice doesn't like see it and can't like prevent it.
Yeah, he just
Um,
wants to hang out. That's all it is.
yeah. So yeah, that's that. Bella does. She runs and gets on the motorcycle. They zippity doo dah over to past the territory line, and yeah. Then it's chapter 8.
Yeah. Chapter 8. They go. Do they go to La Push? I assume they go to La Push. Yeah, they must. Um,
Yeah,
and I just have notes here saying that Jacob tells Bella about Quill imprinting. Um, yeah, that's kind of the first thing, I guess. Unless you
same.
have before that. Okay.
Yeah. Um, I think that the major things from Quill imprinting are two things. One, Jacob says the line, maybe imprinting is more common than people think because half the pack has imprinted on someone now, which I'm really curious about because we learn a little later in this section when they're going over the tribe's stories that seemingly they have not interacted with other werewolves. Like, seemingly it's just this tribe, and right now, currently, is the largest amount of werewolves there has ever been, with the exception of the current or of the original pack.
Hmm.
It just
And
makes me
it's
think,
go ahead. Finish.
oh, that they
Yeah.
just don't know anything.
Yeah.
Like, they're basing what's like normal is 100% based on like super old legends and history, and like not, yeah, like they just don't really know anything
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. I was gonna say it seems like based off the stories that we get later on, that it probably isn't other tribes that have werewolves. And also I'm curious like how long ago it was that the werewolves were introduced. And I can't remember, and maybe it goes more into it later on and I have a note on it, but um about like when they stopped becoming werewolves because initially there wasn't any vampires, like that isn't why they changed, but I wonder how long the gap between was not having any, or did they have werewolves up until Ephraim Black? I don't know. Anyway, sorry, my mind's going other places now. Never mind.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, obviously we'll talk about it more, but it does say the werewolves, the original tribe, like the descendants stopped turning into werewolves basically.
Yeah,
Like it
before
gradually
Ephraim
faded
Black.
out before Ephraim Black, and then
Yeah,
it was when the vampires came back.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
We've jumped many chapters ahead,
yeah,
but
yeah.
not actually.
I
Back to
think it's
chapter
only like
8.
one or two. Yeah. Um, but Quill imprints on who is it exactly?
Claire.
I know, but I was gonna say her relation.
Oh, it's Emily's niece.
Emily's niece, okay.
Yeah.
Who is two. And
Yeah.
my note here was a little bit of foreshadowing with this, which I completely forgot that this happened in the books. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I literally think they do this foreshadowing to like prime the audience so they're less creeped out when
yeah,
Stephenie reveals who Jacob imprints on.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah. I don't love it. I don't love it. We have a lot of like people being into children, and I just think, I don't know. I just think we shouldn't normalize it in any way. In a
yeah,
mythical, it's already like we all can admit it's already a little like too much for a lot of people to have like 18-year-olds with like immortal mythical men. but like we shouldn't make it overt children. Like we're talking about 12-year-olds, we're talking about 2-year-olds.
Yeah, yeah. I
Not
know. I had a
cool.
note somewhere in this section about like how I feel like this wouldn't fly if it was written today, but I'm like, maybe it actually would because it's a fantasy book, and I feel like fantasy books get away with a lot of stuff that they probably shouldn't. At least some of it for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah. And then I was curious about is it this section where oh yeah. Jacob talks about how um, imprinting isn't necessarily just romantic, that you become whatever the person needs you to be, whether it's a protector, lover, friend, or a brother. But then it kind of alludes to like, oh, Quill doesn't have any romantic feelings for her right now. And I'm like, does it inevitably lead to romantic feelings? Because that's all we've seen.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of what is alluded to again later at the bonfire when Bella is talking about Kim and what's his face.
Jared, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And talking about like if someone had become whatever you needed and had given you so much adoration and commitment, isn't it like inevitable that you would like fall in love with them?
Yeah.
And I think there's maybe something like a little true to that. Like we all want to be wanted, but also like, yeah, again, there are no examples of people rejecting that they've been imprinted on. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just not.
Yeah, in this section, like, Bella asks, she asks specifically, doesn't Claire get a choice here? And Jacob responds saying, of course, but why wouldn't she choose him in the end? He'll be her perfect match, like he was designed for her alone. And I'm like, I mean, it's good she gets a choice, but also it sounds like she doesn't really have a choice, you know? Like,
It's just a little. It's a little creepy for me. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, there's more things I could say, and I think it's an interesting discussion just on like when is fantasy like a really good medium that helps us understand other people's perspectives and can be really like beneficial or empowering. I know a lot of people who fall into like our corner of book talk who are like feel very empowered by strong female characters and things like that, right? But also I think there's a lot that fantasy does to like make beliefs worse in like misguided ways. Like my brother-in-law Ben is a fantasy author and talks about a lot of fantasy like is actually kind of like racism. Like it's like the elves hate the orcs and it's cool for elves to kill orcs because they're different or whatever, you know. And it just like can perpetuate like a lot of actual like harmful ideas also. So I don't know. It's a yeah, it's an interesting medium that gets a lot more grace than other mediums.
yeah.
Yeah. But moving right along. uh Bella, oh, they ride motorcycles together, Bella and Jacob, um and Jacob talks about after the imprinting conversation before they ride motorcycles, basically being like he's still super into Bella. Bella is the only person for him. And eventually, this leads to a conversation where Bella finally conveys to Jacob how serious she is about becoming a vampire. And Jacob really loses it. And he specifically ends the fight saying, one, he says she won't be her anymore. So there's no one to like forgive because Bella will be gone. And the other thing is that he says it would just be better if she was dead than if she became a vampire.
Mm,
Um, yeah, and Bella leaves. Like she's like over, can't deal with it.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, there's also a thing that I thought was important. It was actually a question that we had. I think it was last week. Yeah, last week. Saying where Jacob talks about there wasn't a geographic limit to the treaty, and
yes,
that if they change her, they are like free to go after them. So she can't just go to Mexico like we talked about, but
Yeah, yeah,
which I feel like is a big thing that should be talked about more and does not seem to be at all. Which I don't know, maybe that's coming, but doesn't seem a concern to anybody right now.
yeah. And the other implication being like, then, like, okay, if the Cullens break the treaty, like anywhere on the planet Earth, then the werewolves can like start a war with them. But like the werewolves, one, have to know, which obviously they would with Bella. And like, then what would they would all leave to go hunt them down in Brazil or wherever they were? Like, it just seems so weird to me. Like, why is that? I don't get it. I don't get it. I
I
don't get
mean,
it.
I'm sure if like nobody in the pack had a like personal tie to the person, that it wouldn't matter. But because Jacob has a tie to her,
Yeah, he's like using it to his advantage, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Bella takes her motorcycle, leaves La Push, and goes to the Cullens house, where Alice is kind of just a good friend. Mostly she's sitting there. Bella finds Alice sitting on top of her Porsche moping that Edward is going to take it away and she didn't get to drive it.
I do love this side plot. Despite it being a car thing, I do like this.
Yeah.
Um,
And she's just so sad that Edward's going to take away her Porsche. But
which is funny because we do find out that he's not planning on doing that, and I'm like, is he like thinking about doing it just to mess with Alice? Because obviously she'd be able to see that. Like,
right, right. Yeah. Yeah, he must be. That's honestly so funny. It's
yeah,
also so funny because I'm like, they're all rich independently.
yeah,
Like,
like
she
she
could
could
buy
buy
her
her own easy.
yellow Porsche.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Something about it. Yeah, being the gift. Anyways, um, yeah, and but she doesn't push Bella to talk about it more. And Bella just like goes up and goes to sleep after kind of accepting that she's still on house arrest.
Yeah. And then Edward visits in the middle of the night, or comes home, I guess. He's not visiting, but
It
um,
is house.
yeah, yeah. And also, we didn't mention, I don't think we talked about how Bella, out of her stubbornness, has decided to sleep on the couch rather than the bed that they have provided
Yes,
because
yeah.
she's upset about it.
Like, yeah, that's like happened in the last chapter of last sections. I think she's already decided she's sleeping on the couch when Rosalie
Mhm.
walked.
Yeah,
But yeah, she kept it up. She's not sleeping on the bed the whole time.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, but she does wake up in the bed because Edward has moved her to the bed and then is questioning her.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Which I had a note here about Edward talks about how he is going to try not to have prejudice against the werewolves and acknowledges like her point on this. And I, this whole time, was so convinced that Alice had some type of vision that was making him like think or say this or whatever. And I'm convinced for like the multiple chapters that we read ahead that it is something along those lines and not actually him having a change of heart. And then when I was looking back at my notes, I'm like, he might actually just have a change of heart here because we don't see anything in the next couple chapters about that. So he might just be becoming a better person.
yeah. I, of course, was so relieved Edward had a change of heart after having, the last whole book and the beginning of this being like, do I not like Edward? I don't like Jacob either. I like Jacob is better at the beginning of New Moon, like he's a good friend to her,
Yeah.
but like he doesn't react very well to a lot of her stuff. So I don't love Jacob either.
I feel like the last book was a really bad book for Edward, and this book seems to be really bad for Jacob and Charlie, so
Yeah,
far at least.
true. Um Yeah, but Edward apologizes, and I think he genuinely means it.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, he even says, like, Bella's like, okay, but did you talk to Alice? Like, do you know what happened? And he is like, no, I know you went to La Push. It's okay. Um, and yeah, has like a genuine change of heart. Um, and yeah, yeah. And I think it gets even better as Bella tells Edward about Jacob's reaction and expects him to kind of be like happy and like kind of like rub it in her face, like told you so kind of. And he doesn't. And he just responds that he's so sorry for Bella and that must have been so painful to her.
I know.
Uh,
I was so convinced when she was telling him about Jacob saying that he'd rather see her dead that Edward was gonna make some like sarcastic joke being like, "Oh yeah, me too." Like, but he didn't, which is good. So,
yeah, yeah. He officially is back in my good graces. You know, that's what Edward's been waiting for.
of course.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he responded so well. That's the end of my notes. Anything else you want to add for eight, or you want to jump into chapter nine?
Only that I was so convinced that something was going on with Alice because Edward makes some comment about that he thought that Alice stepped out. I'm like, she's having some vision, something's up, but that seemingly is
Mm-hmm.
not the case. So I was wrong.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, chapter nine. I'm ready for if you are.
Great. Starts off with Jacob calling. Well, Bella goes home. She goes back to her house. House arrest is over and finds out Jacob called. Charlie wrote a note saying Jacob called, says he didn't mean it. Charlie's giving him the benefit of the doubt. I am not happy with Charlie in this section.
Yeah, the fact that he says like in his like note that he wrote about Jacob's message saying be nice and give him a break when he has zero context as to what is going on. I'm like, I'd be so annoyed if that was my dad. Like, I just no, yeah, no. It's not a good moment for Charlie.
Yeah. Then here is one of the worst lines of the book, in my opinion, so far.
I think I know
Is
what it's gonna be.
yeah,
It's a
uh,
Charlie line.
it's a Charlie line.
Yeah.
So Bella does not call Jacob back. She goes back upstairs, and Charlie's like, what, you're not going to call him? And she says, no. And he says, that's not an attractive behavior, Bella. Forgiveness is divine.
Yeah.
What kind of line is that?
I
What
I
is that? It
li-
is so unconscious.
I literally looked up this line because I was like, that has to be referencing something. And so I looked it up. And also it seems very out of character for Charlie to say in the first place. Um, and it's from
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
it's from like the thing that's to err is human and to forgive is divine is the full line apparently. So I've only heard to err is to human, but yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's fine, I guess. It's not. It's such a weird line. It does not fit here. It doesn't fit Charlie. It's just weird. It's just weird. I don't like it. The next big thing is Bella goes upstairs and is missing a bunch of laundry and her pillow, which she thinks that Alice has cleaned and moved stuff around. Um, and then she goes to do her laundry and she does her dad's laundry. This is such a minor note, but it like really annoys me that she cooks all of Charlie's meals and is doing his laundry and he's like very disconnected from her in the last two books. Like, I don't know. I just
You're seeing a little bit of Stephenie's Mormonism roots here a little bit.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the I don't know if it's more annoying the like expected gender roles or the like I don't know, just generally him being a bad parent. Like he's just neglectful. Yeah. Yeah, I wish they addressed her. Like, I feel like they do address that, like, Renee is not a good parent, but they don't address that Charlie is not a good parent either, really. Not as overtly. Like, Renee is a lot more blamed when it seems like Renee's stuff is around like emotionally being less like stable and more spontaneous than Bella, where Charlie just like doesn't take care of Bella. And in fact, Bella takes care of him. And like both are just as serious neglect, you know?
Yeah. And
Like,
also at
yeah,
one point, Charlie said something about how, I think Charlie said it, yeah, about how Jacob like physically takes care of his dad and Bella like emotionally takes care of her mom and doesn't acknowledge anything that Bella does to take care of him, which is also problematic. Like, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's not a great moment for Charlie. Um, yeah. Then Edward comes over and immediately realizes that there is an unknown smell in the house. And he thinks because Charlie was not harmed, it's probably the Volturi.
And he's convinced it is not a werewolf either, because that was something that I was potentially thinking, but it is not. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does think it's a vampire, but we know it's not Victoria because he does not recognize the scent at all.
mhm.
Yeah. Edward then immediately takes Bella and goes to the Collins house, and he is pissed at Alice for not catching this and not seeing it. Like he's really mad at her and is like kind of yelling.
Yeah, this is where I was like, I thought I knew what was happening, but Alice is not seeing anything. So what the heck is happening? And I still am not 100% convinced I know what's going on. So,
Yeah, yeah, I cannot totally remember. I have some theories,
yeah. And they do
but yeah,
kind of talk about it towards the end of this section. So,
yeah. Well, I'll say at this point, it is kind of, I no longer think this by the end of this section, but I was thinking that the Volturi came to investigate everything happening in Seattle and that then they needed to prove, they thought it was Bella causing all the issues in Seattle as a newborn vampire. And we're going to use this as a reason to like get Bella and then Edward and Alice to come work for them. Um, which it could have gone that way, but we're led to believe that that's not what's happening in Seattle. But I thought it was like proof to prove that she wasn't a vampire yet.
yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, Edward then apologizes to Alice, which
Growth.
is good growth. And then they start like speculating who it might be. Um, Bella also brings up during this time that like now they really need to change her. Like it is like very important. And they once again brush her off. And here's what I don't get. They totally brush off changing Bella, saying that like you're totally safe, you have all of us, we have Alice, blah blah blah, all these things, right? But like literally a vampire got into her house and Alice is saying like she's not in danger, but the stories just don't match up to me that she's like 100% safe with them, but also a vampire can like come into their town and into the house without them knowing.
Yeah.
Also, just like Alice has been able to see vampires coming, like unknown vampires just like dropping by. Like she knew Laurent, Victoria, and James were coming, and they didn't know them at all, you know?
Yeah. I have
So,
a note
yeah.
here talking about how like specifically with Bella being like, "Oh, you should change me now," that I actually like agree with her, which most of the time I do not agree with Bella because she also is talking about how she should get changed, and Edward is quick to say, or no, Carlisle says, think of Charlie and how it would hurt him if she disappeared. And she's like, I am thinking of Charlie. Like, he is the reason that I am worried about this. And I think that is super, super valid and kind of crazy that they're not acknowledging it. And they're all just like, we're just going to be a little more careful. It's okay. Like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. But
Yeah, it just seems like inconsistent, you know? Like I don't get it. I
I'm
don't get
sure
it.
if we had Edward's perspective, there would be some justification as to what was really going on. Although there seems to be less of that because he is being more transparent, seemingly at least, with Bella about what's going on. So
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Um, let's see.
my
Uh,
next note is about when she goes back home then. But
mhm. Yeah. The Cullens basically decide it's okay. They're just gonna have somebody watching Bella like round the clock. Um, and then yeah, they go home and Jacob has called again. Uh,
and Charlie here pissed me off because Charlie is like smiling and being all smug because he could tell that Bella and Edward are in a fight. And I'm like, even if you don't like the guy, that is your daughter. Like, you could be smug about it internally, but you don't like tell her, like, essentially that you're happy that she's having a fight with her boyfriend. Like,
yeah, yeah. Okay, didn't that happen before she left though? Like when Edward first came over?
no, it talks about like that he's like ignoring her and like gets whisked out the door. But no, I have it highlighted when she comes back. I think he's still being smug when Edward is there previously because I think yeah, they are having like a fight then, but it talks about Charlie in here, this is the line. Charlie was in a good mood when we got back. He could see the tension between me and Edward, and he was misinterpreting it. He watched me throw together his dinner with a smug smile on his face. I'm like, come on. Like
Yeah. Yeah, Charlie has been like the worst. He's been the worst in this book,
And
honestly.
it even says in this section that Bella is assuming that he waited until Edward was present to pass on the fact that Jacob called again. I'm like, come
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
And she does call him out when he tries to tell her that she's being petty and should call him back. Literally the word he used that said, "Don't be petty, Bella." And I really like this line she has. She says, "Is Jacob paying you for all the PR, or are you a volunteer?" Like I love the sassy Bella quotes. There are not enough of those in the movies.
I wish there aren't enough of them in the book, to be honest. Like,
Yeah,
it's so rare for her to stand up for herself, you know?
yeah.
Like, she
But when she
literally,
does, they're good
yeah,
lines.
they are. They are. Ooh, yeah. She does decide she's going to forgive and call Jacob again, but she's going to wait till the morning and let him have 12 hours more of feeling bad. How do you feel about this? Because I disagree.
Um, I had a note about this somewhere. She also talks about, does she say that about the 12 hours more to be upset? I missed that.
Yeah.
'Cause the only thing that I caught with this was, um, she said she doesn't want to talk to him with Charlie around to have to watch every word. Which that makes sense to me. I'm trying to find
Yeah.
the 12-hour thing. I must have missed that because I said even in my notes I was like I was gonna be annoyed with her for not calling back, but that's a valid reason to like have to watch what she's saying. But
Mm-hmm.
if it was to make him more upset, yeah, that's not great either. But
Mm. Yeah.
oh yeah,
Um,
here. Yeah, it says, and it wouldn't hurt him to feel guilty for 12 more hours. Yeah, that's pretty shitty of her, but
yeah. Yeah. That's not great. I just don't like that she's just like, I don't know. Maybe I just feel differently again, this is the early 2000s. Making jokes about somebody dying is just whatever. But I just don't think, like, I think she just like brushes over that he literally, her best friend, says it'd be better if she was dead than like made the life choice she wanted.
Yeah,
I just think that's like insane. Like, that's
it
such
is.
a bad move. And I just like cannot imagine keeping anyone around in my life who would like act like that towards me, even in a joke. Like, that
Yeah,
would be a
it
pretty,
is a very, very harsh thing to say. Like the most harsh thing you could say.
yeah. Yeah. And again, we're talking about different times. He said it was like rash and he's sorry. But to me, I just think it's like not okay to even like make jokes about that. Is, I don't know. I just think it's like so over the line. Like,
And I
I
should
would never.
say, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was just going to rant about it more.
I was just gonna say in the clarification to you asking me about my feelings about her not calling him back, my reaction was more about her not calling him to tell him about what's going on with the vampire. I think it's totally valid for not to call him for like him saying that to her. So
Yeah.
just want to
Yeah.
clarify that because kind of
Yeah.
forgot
Yeah.
that's the reason that he called. So that is valid. But
Yeah. No, that's true. I wasn't even thinking about the other vampire.
yeah, no, that's what I was thinking about when I was like, why would she not call him? But it makes sense when you, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Um yeah. So where are we? Where are my notes? Oh, here we go. Um okay, so then she does call him in the morning when Edward is there, and Edward asks to talk to Jacob and basically like fills him in, asks him, like, double checks it's not a werewolf, asks if the wolves like have noticed any like unusual scents, anything like that. And even like we're kind of led to believe that they're going to try to potentially renegotiate the treaty. And yeah, then Jacob is going to come over, and that's kind of where that ends.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a lot of notes on this. I did have like um a question about Bella says specifically it seemed like Edward was really over the whole anti-werewolf thing, and in this moment when reading this chapter I was like, so we do we think that the werewolves are already working with the Cullens? But that apparently is not the case, as we find out later on. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Okay, let's jump into chapter 10 then. Uh,
Mm,
in chapter 10, Jacob comes over to get the scent. Uh, yeah,
causing Edward to leave because it's just easier if they're not around each other, even if they are better at being amiable with one another. But
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, we also, after Jacob like goes up to her room, they start like chatting while Bella's doing dishes. And he has some questions about what it's like for Bella to date a vampire. Um, and at some point during this conversation, he tenses so much while he is drying slash rinsing off a knife in his hand, and he clenches around the knife blade and cuts his hand open like a giant gash, and starts bleeding all over the place.
yep.
Mm-hmm.
But
Uh,
he's real nonchalant about it.
He's
Mm,
very nonchalant. Bella nearly passes out. I don't think it's consistent that Bella could basically pass out from seeing one drop of a classmate's blood, but somehow holds it together with Jacob's entire hand cut open in front of her. But
I mean, she did go through the whole thing with James in between there, so but still.
yeah, I guess. But I
Yeah.
don't know that that would make her reaction less bad.
I think it's really the one drop of blood that really gets me. I'm like, there's no way that someone I mean, unless you're very, very sensitive to it, in which case obviously she would pass out here. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Anyways, but lo and behold, Jacob heals super fast because he's a werewolf boy. Um,
Super
and then
fast.
super fast, little werewolf boy. Uh, and yeah, then Bella washes everything with bleach. And Jacob is like, "Are you OCD? Like, what the heck?" And she's like, blood is kind of a big deal around here."
I enjoyed their interaction in this chapter a lot. So
Yeah.
I also do have to share about one of the other questions that he asked her earlier on. After he asked about what it's like having a vampire for a boyfriend, he also asked what it's like having a werewolf for a best friend, which I thought was a cute moment. So
Yeah, yeah, it was. Uh, so cute. Um, yeah, then Jacob leaves. Edward comes in and immediately asks if she stabbed Jacob because in all that cleaning, she forgot to clean the knife covered in his blood.
minor detail, minor.
Oh man. Yeah, so I thought that was pretty funny.
Mhm.
Yeah. Edward, when he's coming in, brings the mail, and there's a pretty significant envelope in the mail for Bella.
Yeah. It's from Dartmouth and she got in
Mm-hmm.
apparently with she's thinking that's not possible. So, that little college admission scandal, maybe that was because of Twilight. Got the idea there.
Yeah, yeah. She does joke previously about the only way she would get in is if all of a sudden there was a new Cullen branch of the library at Dartmouth. So that's
Yeah.
pretty funny. Um, okay. I also, her main objection to Dartmouth, she thinks about like how proud her mom and dad would be, what a huge deal it will be to them to know she got into Dartmouth. I feel like it makes more sense for her to go to a big Ivy League school like than Alaska, but her main like objection is specifically she can't afford Dartmouth. Um which one, if you get into Ivy League schools, you generally actually have less debt than state schools because Ivy League schools have a lot more scholarships. Fun fact that I learned while applying to scholarships in high school. Um, but also, Edward is like down to pay for her to go to whatever college she wants, and she firmly denies this. And her justification for this is she's not okay with him spending the price of like when like she's not okay with him spending as much as it would cost him to get another sports car for her to go to school. This is so weird to me. This is so weird. I get the like idea of like don't let your boyfriend or significant other like the weird dynamics that can come from them giving you like really expensive gifts. So like I see maybe a little bit of justification, but this is not like man with money trying to manipulate you. Like this is the person that wants to like marry you and is going to be tied to you for forever. And like he doesn't need another sports car and he could very easily like let you go to an Ivy League school to get like the best education. I don't know. This just seems like a weird line in the sand for me.
Yeah, the whole car thing makes it especially weird. Like that just is not something that I feel like should be in there or whatever. But at the same time, like I do get her not wanting to go to Dartmouth because if she plans to be changed, like she probably isn't going to be that focused on school for one. And like also it is like smaller population wise to go to an Ivy League school than it would be to go to Alaska. So, you know, there's less people around. And I forgot I was gonna say something else and completely forgot. So I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I do think if she tells her parents she drops out, like it would be harder to justify dropping out of an Ivy League school.
I just remember the other thing I was gonna say was if I were in her situation and felt like I had gotten admitted to a school because of some form of bribery, I don't think I'd want to go there. So there's that too. But
Yeah, I guess I can see it being like she feels like this is all just like privilege the Cullens have that they're just like giving to her, like just like, making
yeah.
it happen. And maybe she's uncomfortable with that level of privilege. But like that would have been an interesting thing to say overtly.
Yeah.
And instead, Stephenie Meyer chooses to say,
Make it about cars.
yeah, basically imply that it would be better for Edward to buy another sports car than like pay for Bella to get an education. And I just don't love the undertones of that.
I'm definitely with you on that one.
Again, maybe it's the current political climate, but I just don't like the implication that men should drive sports cars instead of women getting education. Crazy.
I agree with you, especially when you put it like that. That's okay because the women are getting sports cars too.
It's true. Not Bella, but
If she wanted one, well, we learn later about a potential vehicle, so
true. Yeah. Anyways, so there's that. We also make the connection that I had already made, and I'm guessing you did too, that whoever was in her room was the person who took her stuff.
yeah, I made the connection at this point that I completely forgot she hadn't mentioned that to anybody when
Oh,
they learned about the vampires being in the house. I'm like, how did she not mention that? Like, really?
yeah.
Like, I
Yeah,
just
she just
made
like
that
so
connection
believed,
somehow.
yeah, she so believed it was Alice, which is so funny.
And still does. Until Edward's
Yeah,
like, yeah, Alice didn't do that. Like,
yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, so that's funny and just like weird. Um, Also, again, we find out later, but it turns out they took like a lot of her stuff. Like she makes comments about how like a good chunk of her wardrobe is missing. Like they make it sound
yeah.
like they took half her clothes
Well,
and her.
she made a comment, I think, back when she discovered stuff was missing, that it looked like from her laundry hamper that about half of the clothes were gone from in there, from her
Mhm.
dirty clothes. So,
Yeah, yeah. And we're led to believe she's not super clean. So it's probably a substantial amount of
yeah,
dirty clothes.
yeah.
Yeah. Edward then gets a call from Carlisle about the baby vamps in Seattle.
The little
uh,
babies.
all the babies in Seattle. Yeah. So that's interesting. We get more context later about that. Um, yeah. Then Bella decides she's going to go to the bonfire in La Push. Edward is very supportive.
I did find it funny that when she was talking about how she wants to go, she felt like it was like kind of a silly thing with all the stuff that was going on to go hang out with a bunch of quote unquote big idiot wolf boys, which I just loved that line so much. Especially coming from her. So
Yeah, yeah, so
she had a
funny,
problem with Edward calling Jacob a dog last week, but now she's calling them big idiot wolf boys.
but in an endearing way. So
I
it's
know.
okay.
I just thought it was funny.
No, it's so funny. Yeah. She also, we get some details about Bella decides she's going to bring the motorcycle back to La Push now that she has forgiven Jacob. And Edward has purchased a motorcycle for himself to ride with her.
Yes, he has a big fancy one, it seems like. Don't get as
Yeah,
much detail about the specs of this as we do with most of the cars, so
thank goodness.
not
Frankly,
that I'd understand any of it. So
yeah, no.
But then it's kind of Edward realizes that it's kind of her thing with Jacob, which is nice that he just kind of realizes that without her having to say it. And I also
Yeah,
do, I think it's nice that she likes doing it with Jacob because she can be more careless because she asks Edward about what he would do if she was going to crash, and she knew that it was going to be that he would try to make it not happen. And then Edward is like, well, at least take this gift from me. And it's a helmet and a jacket. And I'm like, this girl has wiped out how many times and gone to the hospital multiple times and hasn't been wearing a helmet? What?
yeah, literally. I was like, how do you not have a helmet for a motorcycle?
Yeah. And I am like thinking back to like this time frame. And obviously, I was a child when this was written, but I do remember it being a thing like when you were riding a bike or whatever, it wasn't cool to like wear a helmet. And that was a thing. But I'm like, on a motorcycle is insane. Also, everybody wear a bike helmet too. But I feel like
Yeah,
it's less of a thing now. I don't know if that's because we're adults or because of the times. I think it's both. But
yeah, yeah. No, I don't really see like a lot of kids and like no adults not wear helmets. I never see adults biking without a helmet in
yeah,
Denver,
yeah,
at least for context. So, yeah. Anyways, different times. Yeah, you really do not see a lot of motorcyclists without helmets either anymore. I feel like except for like sometimes like guys riding big choppers in like a vest,
yeah.
which
I was gonna say
like,
all the people who go to the bike bar that's like right across from my apartment, those are the people who don't wear helmets typically because they're like real bikers, you know. So,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah, but crazy, crazy to me. Mm. Oh man. Um, yeah. All right. Are we ready to jump into chapter 11?
let me look. Oh, I did have a note here. After we see that Edward drives her to the border of where the yeah, okay, this is this chapter. Drives her to the border of where the why can I not form words today? The border of where the treaty deal is.
Yeah, like the
Words.
vampire territory.
Territories, that's the word I was looking for. Um, and goes to meet Jacob there, who is then gonna drive the rest of the way. Bella makes a comment about how it reminds her of when she was 7 years old and Renee and Charlie would like drop her off, and I just thought that was hilarious. Uh, and Edward
And
thought too, but
messed up also. I was like,
oh yeah, it's messed up, but I
girl, you have
yeah,
trauma.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Weird. Weird, weird. Also, somehow Edward fits her entire motorcycle in the trunk of his Volvo car.
I know. I was like, I could see if you were taking the truck, but I don't know. Maybe it's a little tiny motorcycle, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I am getting the vibe they're like dirt bike crotch rocket motorcycles
Yeah,
because they were given for her to her for free,
yeah,
but still it still I was like, what? That does not make the physics work. I don't think that makes sense.
yeah.
Whatever. It's not that important. Okay, so chapter 11, it starts off with Bella going to the bonfire. The whole pack is there, as well as some tribe leaders. And people generally greet her pretty warmly and are happy to see her, which is nice.
Yeah, and it says that other than a few teasing complaints, mostly by Paul, about keeping the bloodsucker stench downwind, that she was treated like someone who belonged, which I feel like it's fair to make some comment about her dating a vampire in this situation. And also, Leah and Seth are also there in addition to the leaders, and their mom is now seemingly a leader, has taken over for Harry Clearwater. So
Yep. Um, yeah. It talks about how much all the werewolf boys are eating a bunch, and then we get into the origin story of how the werewolves came to be, and then a secondary story about them interacting with vampires for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in light of um, kind of the information, Amy, that you revealed just about Stephenie Meyer's being, I don't know the right word, but using these stories and this like kind of like cultural appropriation here. How do we feel about like sharing the stories on the podcast? I know we obviously don't want to be part of that, but we're also like discussing the book itself, and this is part of the book.
Yeah,
What are you?
I think it's okay for us to talk about it. I honestly don't have like a ton of notes on it in the first place, but also just the to acknowledge that these are not the real Quileutes tribes like stories. Some of them are taken from what are stories and legends of theirs. I actually did learn that specifically their tribe leader turning from a wolf into a man is one of their stories. I don't know much more detail about it than that, but just to acknowledge that these are not that tribe's real stories and that they are fiction. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, well then we can jump into it. I'll give a summary maybe. I don't have a lot of notes on the stories themselves. Um, but I'll maybe just like describe briefly what the origin story is, and then you can share any like notes or thoughts you had about it.
yeah.
Okay. So the story, actually I had heard similar stories before, which I thought was like kind of interesting that it's at least somewhat based on like real mythology that I've heard. So that was interesting. And gives credit to it also being maybe more sketchy because of that, you know, like complicated in that
Yeah.
way. But essentially, um, when you go back to the tribe's ancestors, there were spiritual leaders who could disconnect their spirit from their body, and they were spiritual warriors. And they talk a lot about the different things they would do, but essentially, they would leave their body somewhere hidden or protected when they were becoming spiritual warriors, and their spirits were out doing things and communing with animals, and could influence the elements. So there is a jealous uh, tribe member, and he realizes that the tribe leader is off in the spirit world and goes to find his body. And then that person also goes into the spirit world, but then immediately jumps into the tribe leader's body, like the chief's body, and then kills his own body so that the spirit of the chief cannot come into his body, essentially trapping the chief as a spirit. He then goes around and pretends to be the chief for seemingly years, and he makes a bunch of new laws saying that nobody else is allowed to go into the spirit world. Everyone has to stay in their body. He takes other wives. He is very exploitative of the tribe, is one of the words they say, and make other people do like a bunch of work for him. Basically, he's a bad leader. He's a bad dude. Eventually, there is like a big incident, again, without trying to take up too much time on the actual podcast retelling the story. They eventually figure this out by an elderly tribe member becoming, going into the spirit world and realizing what's happening. And but they kill the jealous man in the chief's body, kills the old man who realizes this super quickly. There's a lot of like rage and grief, and the spirit of the chief eventually goes into the body of a wolf. He experiences so much rage and sorrow and human emotion that then the wolf becomes a man and like in front of the people, and he says the story and they recognize him as the chief, and yeah, that's what happens. So that's the story of the origin of the werewolf, and then the chief's children going forward are able to transform into werewolves.
I
It's the
did
same
think,
as the men.
yeah, I did think it was interesting that the wolf became a man because of his intense emotions, which is why it's kind of the opposite in this world where they become wolves because of their emotions. Um, and yeah, I did find it interesting that they talk specifically about sons because clearly we know that Leah has not changed yet because they don't acknowledge that at all. So,
Mm-hmm.
I do have I'm curious about what the deal is with that and how much backstory we get because I don't remember. So,
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting in the story that they talk about that the only change that the chief kept in place with the changes that the other person who was inhibiting his body had made was that it was the end of spirit travels as they call it because it was too dangerous. So that was just something I highlighted. I didn't really have comment on, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, then Billy is the one telling these stories also. Billy jumps into the story about meeting the vampires for the first time. Um, Essentially, they find out that a neighboring tribe is having a bunch of women disappear. They eventually find this man made of granite. I think it's always interesting that she always refers to them as granite, not like stone or other. I think she does refer to them as marble once, but it's almost always granite.
That is true.
Anyway, yeah. Um, and so then they, as werewolves, like tore him apart into pieces, but that didn't work. Like the arm went and moved, trying to reassemble itself. And so they lit him on fire, which one, when I think of an arm trying to reassemble itself, I just think of a thing from the Addams family.
I knew that's what you were going to say. Yep.
Oh, so funny. And then the other thing is this answers a major question I've had, which is, are they burning the vampires?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, I was like, this is a big plot hole. Yeah, so glad
I
they
thought
fixed
it was funny that you found it a big plot hole because I'm like, it's pretty easy to just start a fire. But and
I
you're
mean,
typically the one who does not look for plot holes.
I know, but they just had not acknowledged it at all, and I needed them to like acknowledge they were
Yeah.
actually dead, or I was going to be like, they're coming back. Anyways, yeah, so that happens. But they quickly realize this vampire, somehow they know he has a mate that is coming for them. Um, and a bunch of the werewolves have died at this point, or just aren't around. So they really just have the chief still and his son. We also find out that the chief has married his third wife, who we're led to believe is the one he like imprinted on or his like true mate. Um, and so he kind of decides to like give up being a werewolf to live with her. Um, and but then this female vampire is coming. He only has one son who is able to transform into a werewolf at this time, so they're really unprotected. He then he becomes like an old version of a wolf, becoming a werewolf again. But his wife, who again throughout the whole story is just called his third wife, knows what she can do to like stop this vampire, as she sees like her son and husband are going to be killed and really outnumbered. So she runs with a dagger at the vampire, but instead of killing the female vampire, kills herself. She stabs herself in the heart, and is bleeding all over the place, which then distracts the vampire and makes the vampire run to her because she's so drawn to the blood that they're able to defeat her. And two of her sons spontaneously become werewolves, even though they are just children out of their like intense grief and rage at their mom's behalf. And then they say there was no more vampires. The werewolves stopped showing up until Ephraim Black met the Cullens, and all of a sudden there were vampires again. And there, because it was like the biggest group of vampires, hence there was more werewolves than before. Which now we know, like, since this is the largest group of the Cullens, we also know it's the largest werewolf pack.
Yeah. Yeah, here's where I was wondering if Seth and Leah change, like when there's other vampires that come along. That was a thought that crossed my mind. And also during this had me thinking of Bella talks specifically about the wife who saved her husband and her sons and their tribe, and specifically mentions about how they wish that, or she wishes that they had remembered her name because we never get her name in the story, which seems like a significant detail and has me wondering if like we're gonna talk more about like women in the tribe and things with when Leah changes. So
I thought this was so significant, because sorry, I'm trying to find my notes. Oh, I thought she was very specifically interested in the third wife. And it seemed to me like the emphasis was put on how she saved everyone by giving up her life. And I just thought that's very like something Bella would do, like to save Edward and Jacob was absolutely like
she
go
literally the last two books
yeah,
has tried to give up her life to save someone else. So
yeah. Yeah, so that's very Bella, and yeah, she's annoyed that they don't remember her name, which valid, valid Bella. Yeah. She then Bella wakes up, realizes she has fallen asleep, but Jacob already called Edward to come pick her up.
I highlighted where she asked about if Jacob called Edward and he like says yes and has a smile, and I said, "Yay, finally learning." No, I feel like we have seen growth from both Jacob and Edward in this section, so that's good.
Yeah, it is. It was getting old.
Will it go away? Maybe. Who knows?
Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, the chapter then ends talking about a passage Edward was reading in Wuthering Heights, which is specifically about Heathcliff. I have not read Wuthering Heights, so I don't know the context.
Same.
For this. Should that be the next book? We'll just read Wuthering Heights.
Just read all of the things that are referenced in Twilight.
Yeah, genius. How to extend
There's a fair amount. There's a fair amount. So
yeah, it's a lot of Jane Austen.
yeah, Romeo and Juliet. There was some book that Bella said was one of her favorites that Edward hadn't heard of, and I also had not heard of, but I don't remember what it's called. But
yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of classic literature. We get some Hades and Persephone's story, Romeo and Juliet, Robert Frost. It's gonna be this is a long Twilight podcast. We've extended it infinitely. Yeah, but the passage, which again, apparently neither of us know the context nor looked up the context, whoopsies, but is Heathcliff is so mad at somebody that can't remember the female protagonist's name.
Something with a C, I think. I could be wrong though.
Cliff is married to or in love with or whatever. Anyway, she loves somebody else, and he realized it. The section is about how he could kill him and drink his blood. He hated him so much, but he wouldn't for the love of like his wife and this other
Catherine. I looked it up.
Catherine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which definitely feels applicable to Edward and Jacob, and where Edward is at with Jacob, specifically blood. Though I don't think he would drink a werewolf blood. I imagine it tastes bad because of how bad they smell. But that's just a personal theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, that's the end of 11.
Yeah. And then we get into chapter 12.
Yeah.
The first note that I have is Alice is planning a grad party.
Surprise, surprise. Alice is excited to throw a human party. She's looking for any excuse. Mm-hmm.
I just also have to make a note that in the movie version, which Callie didn't have the chance to watch, which is okay because there was some spoilers. I think I already talked about that. Um, but in the movie version, when Alice talks about this party, we also learned that Jess is the valedictorian, which I feel like I hope that's not the case in the books because I don't see that. But
This is not accurate.
yeah, yeah. So
it's
there's
a
that.
small school though, so who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, still doesn't seem right.
No.
Angela's jam, like give
That's
it.
what I thought too.
Yeah. Yeah. Bella then is like getting really anxious about the party, and she's like, Alice, couldn't you have waited longer to like tell me? Now I'm gonna have to dread this for weeks. And Alice is like, weeks. We graduate next week. Like graduation is a week away. To which Bella kind of loses it.
A little bit.
Yeah, she freaks out a little bit. She's panicking.
Yeah.
And just thinking about like she's not really ready to become a vampire actually and say all these goodbyes and be done with being a human. So
Yeah. She is kind of conflicted because she is like not ready but is ready at the same time because after school Edward comes over and they talk about it and he was saying, "Oh, maybe you're not ready," and she lies and says that she is and she has to be. And he's like, "You don't have to be anything." And then she's like, "There was some random vampire in my room in the Volturi and all that crap, so it's kind of a problem." And Edward says, "All the more reason to wait." And she responds, "That doesn't make any sense, Edward." And I gotta agree with her on that, because what the fuck is Edward talking about? That is more reason to wait.
Yeah. I feel like he's saying it like he kind of alludes to it later, what he means by saying that Carlisle wouldn't want to do this with her under duress, like feeling like she had to because she didn't have another choice. But also, that's the only reason Carlisle has turned anyone was because they had no other choice. So I don't actually feel like Carlisle would be morally opposed to that. Feels like the only time he's morally okay with it.
Yeah, that is valid.
So yeah.
I
Don't
also Edward talks about how he views it as such a selfish thing for him to do to turn her because he's taking stuff away from her and like he doesn't know if he has a soul and that sort of thing. And I'm like, I get where he's coming from, but also isn't it more selfish to not allow her to make her own decision, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I do think so.
Which I feel like is something we have talked about before also, but
Yeah, we have. Yeah. There is a funny moment in this. I thought where Bella is also panicking because while Alice mentions the grad party, she also pre-thanks Bella for the gift that she gets her.
Mhm.
Bella cannot figure out what she's going to get Alice. So she asks Edward to tell her from his mind reading of Alice what she's going to get them, which I think is hilarious and the weirdest mix around
Yeah.
ever.
It's also confusing because then he tells her and it's like concert tickets and she's like, "Oh yeah, I had that idea like last week." And it's like that I don't know, that's just confusing to think about the timeline of those events and like that it actually was her idea and not Edward just telling her like very
Right.
confusing.
It would have had to be her decision
Yeah.
for Alice to see it in the future, and Alice wouldn't have seen it until Bella decided.
Mhm.
But then
But
that
she
she,
wouldn't have known unless Edward had told her.
yeah, she would have just forgotten about it.
Yeah.
Very complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, kind of a funny moment. Then it gets a little more serious again, and Edward and Bella talk and both realize they have some mutual misunderstandings about why the other person is holding back from moving their relationship forward. I put relationship forward in quotes because for Bella, the confusion is around why it's the relationship of her being human versus a vampire. And for Edward, it's more of a traditional relationship thing, aka, why won't you marry me? um,
I love her answer to that, but that I thought was kind of a funny moment, to be
yeah, jump
honest.
into it. Jump into it.
Yeah. Yeah, she says that when he asks about what the truth is behind why she doesn't want to get married, she's like, "You're gonna laugh at it." And he's like, "I'm not gonna laugh at it. Why would I laugh at it?" And she's like, "You're going to, but um, it's just so embarrassing." And I'm like, her reason to not get married is because it's embarrassing. I was not expecting that, to be honest, but she
Yeah.
does talk about that she doesn't want to be that girl who gets married right out of high school and everyone assumes that she got knocked up and all of that stuff and to get married at 18 and that's not what smart or responsible or mature people do and she just doesn't want to be that girl, which when she expands upon it is kind of understandable, but just the fact that she starts by saying it's embarrassing, I just thought was funny. But
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, so that's the misunderstanding around being a vampire is Bella assumes that Edward doesn't want to change her because he isn't going to love her as much if she's a vampire. His response is also funny, where he's like, "My life will be so much easier if you're a vampire. Like, it's really hard not to like break you all the time,"
yeah.
which I also think is really funny. So, like, yeah, it's just kind of like it feels like a real relationship moment where you've both made up like a reason the other person is thinking in their head and then you finally both admit it and it's like sweet, like it's like fixing the miscommunication and they're both being like kind of silly and they both have like kind of silly but like still valid reasons for
Hmm.
how they think. Anyways, I just think it's like it's a nice moment.
Yeah, I am liking their relationship better in this book because one, I mean, Edward's having some growth on some of his stuff that I have problems with, but also they are just communicating more, so they're understanding each other more. So just
Yeah.
some growth on their part. So
Yeah, Bella's standing up for herself more. Edward is being more understanding. Yeah,
mhm.
so far good. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling
Yeah,
better
which
with
is
that.
good since they're talking about getting married and whatnot. So
True. And they do. Spoiler.
what?
Shocking.
Marry Jacob? I thought that was gonna happen.
Uh, as if.
You know, if
And
Jacob asked Charlie, he'd be okay with it. So.
yeah, true. Ugh, Charlie, you're driving me crazy.
Mhm.
Oh man. Yeah. But anyways, cute relationship moment for them. Glad they worked through the miscommunication. Um, yeah. I also think it's interesting to jump back to what you were saying. Like, Bella views it as like kind of embarrassing, which I do get. Like, I think everyone is kind of judgmental of the person who like graduates high school and immediately gets married. I don't Amy, did you have any friends who did that? I have one friend who was 18.
No, the only friend that I can think of who like married someone and continued dating them from high school specifically waited until she was 21 so she could legally drink at her wedding. So
Oh,
I don't have any friends. What?
I was like, me, but you have two friends.
I do have, yeah,
I
yeah,
did not because I wanted to wait to legally drink.
yeah, yeah, no. Um, yeah, no, I don't know anyone who got married right away. So
Okay. Yeah, I have one friend who got married at 18. And it is different. Like, again, I am a religious Christian, was living in conservative North Dakota at the time, and it felt like very normal. It's like a different time period in Fargo, North Dakota, um, which is what the point where the story is going. Um, but even there, 18 felt like young.
yeah.
18 felt really young to me. Like I remember being really surprised when my friend told me that we were gonna be like roommates in college, and instead she was like, just kidding, I can't be your roommate because I'm gonna get married. And I was like, what? We're freshmen in college. It was like it was very surprising to me.
I am 29 years old and can't imagine getting married right now.
Yeah, I did get married at 21, so been
Yeah,
married 7+ years now.
that's
Crazy,
crazy.
crazy. I'm an older person. I don't know. It just, yeah. Also, like now living in Denver, when people find out that I've been married 7 years, everyone assumes I am like 37 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I just take as a sign of how incredibly mature and calm I am. But it's not the most flattering to have people think you're 35 to 37 instead of 29, but whatever, it's fine. Uh, yeah. Um, okay, wait, the point of all of this is that Edward then is like, okay, but can you think, like, Bella's like, I'm not that girl. And Edward is like, but I was that boy. And then thinking about being in the 1920s, and if he met somebody that he felt this way about Bella, the most normal thing would be to be like, you're 18, I'm going to do everything possible to marry you, which just is true for that time period, you know? Um, yeah. And I just think about like the age, like me and Amy's grandma was like 19 when she got married. Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know exactly how old, but yeah.
Yeah. I think she was either 19 when she got married or when she had her first kid.
Yeah.
My other grandma was
It
the
was both
same.
actually.
Okay, yeah, I think my grandma on my other side was like 18 when she got married also.
That is crazy to think about. It's just not something that I think about at all. But yeah, that's accurate. I think it's because both Callie and I's parents were older when they got married, so that seems very different. But
Yeah. Um yeah, and older when they had kids too, which is so
yeah,
much different. Like a lot of my friends' parents also got married at okay, so like my brother-in-law, his parents also got married at like 20 and started having kids right away. And like my dad could be his grandpa, like the age difference, you know? Like, yeah, because my dad is also like a decent amount older than my mom. So it's just, yeah, it's funny. Anyways, not the point, just some family lore for you. As if this wasn't a lore enough heavy chapter
I know. I
section.
almost jumped in and told the story, and I'm like, no, this is just so irrelevant. I don't need to add to it.
I know, but I always tell the stories, so you're owed a few, Amy. You're owed a few.
Well, okay, it's a short
Oh,
story. My,
really?
my dad is older and his brother was a decade older than him. That's his only sibling. And I remember as a kid, like he came to like a basketball game of mine, and everyone assumed that he was my grandpa because he was that age, you know? So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
all. But very exciting story of mine.
Yeah, so funny. Classic us. Um, but yeah, I think this does make a lot of sense that like Edward's entire human life, this would be a super normal time frame. You know, like it does give some more context than some other fantasy stories. That's
Yeah.
the point I'm trying to make. Um, yeah, Bella specifically says she imagines herself in an Anne of Green Gables scene in like Edward's time period and how like their life would look, which I think is kind of cute and funny as an Anne of Green Gables fan. Yeah, then the chapter takes a pretty big twist and turns to talking about the serial killer in Seattle. We read an extensive news story. Um, my biggest note
Also,
is that,
I just had a thought. Well, I'll share. But I, with the serial killer thing, and then also me talking about Jess being valedictorian, Anna Kendrick playing her just reminded me of Anna Kendrick's new movie that she has out on Netflix that is about a serial killer, and I just watched it recently and thought it was very good. And it is a real serial killer that it's about, and she felt conflicted about making money off of it and is donating all of the money that she makes. So I'd recommend watching it. And I am totally forgetting the name of it, but if you search Anna Kendrick on Netflix, it's pretty good. And
yeah,
not graphic, which I appreciated. It's definitely still like a serial about a serial killer, but it's not actually physically graphic. But
okay, that's good to know. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. And but back to Twilight.
Yeah. Yeah, I specifically note one, they spend an extensive amount of time. They basically print the whole article.
Yeah.
It was too much information, I personally thought, or at least more information than we needed. Um, yeah.
I
And
kind
then,
of
but
liked it because you could read into like what the important details were or not, and it didn't just like pick out the random stuff. But also, I thought it was interesting because they talked about previous serial killer that had been in Seattle, and I was not familiar with this person and looked up their name, and it was an actual serial killer. So I don't know. That's interesting, but
yeah. Um,
it is a
yeah,
lot
but
of
it,
information.
yeah, it's a lot of information, but it specifically talks about how much it's escalating. And it talks about now there's been 22 people have been killed in the last 10 days.
Hmm.
That's scary. That's scary.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Which I don't know about you, but at this point where it talks about the most alarming part being the acceleration of it, that there was 6 homicides in the first month, then 11, and now 22 in the last 10 days, I made the connection that there has to be like a bunch of newborns that are happening, which they do then talk about later on. But
yeah, I did not. But
okay.
yeah, yeah. I think I just was like, that's insane.
Yeah. I was also aware vaguely of what the plot of this was. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, Bella brings this up to Edward, and he is basically like, we need to go talk to Jasper right now. And they ditch school to go talk to Jasper about his experience with new baby vampires. Yeah.
I just
So,
laugh at me anytime you say baby vampires.
yeah, I
Probably
know,
has to be the title of this episode now.
right? They do a whole new merch line called Baby Vampire.
Or I think you've said baby vamps before, which I like even more.
Baby Vamps.
Or you could
uh,
be more verbose and be baby vamps.
Baby Vamps.
Uh, oh, the tangents we're going on today.
Oh, yeah. So they go to the Cullens to meet Jasper and talk to him about his experience with baby vampires, though Bella doesn't really know that's what they're going to talk about yet. I also feel like the term baby vampires is going to get confusing when we're starting to talk about actual baby vampires, but we're going to roll with it for
We'll
now.
get to that when we get to it, you know.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. Um, Yeah. Oh, I sorry. I classically was confused by my own notes. But there's a really cute moment when they're all together before we get into like the whole story with like Jasper's history, where Jasper makes a comment to Bella about um, that she's like one of them and one of the Cullens. And yeah, there's just like a sweet moment where Bella didn't realize that Jasper felt that way about her, since they've kind of kept their distance since her birthday when he tried to kill her.
Minor detail.
Um, but yeah, it is kind of a bummer because I feel like their relationship was growing like a lot in Twilight, and like he had such sweet advice for her and was so kind. Um, yeah, so I am like bummed that he's the one who tried to kill her, because like
It is a bummer
it
when
is,
your almost brother-in-law tries to kill you.
ugh, what a bummer.
Yeah, but in this moment, like I think they're all trying to figure out what Jasper's thoughts are on this, so he's kind of the center of attention, and everyone's looking to him to see what he's gonna say. And Bella specifically says that it seems like he doesn't enjoy the spotlight and he hesitates and is reading everyone's face. And then he addresses her and like realizes she's confused. And I'm curious if him being in the spotlight makes it harder for him to like use his powers because he can understand other people's emotions, and to have all that attention on you at once, it's like probably hard to like analyze what is going on. But
Yeah,
so I just
probably.
had that as a thought as to why that might be. But
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Um, yeah, Jasper then shows Bella a crescent shaped scar that is the same as Bella's. And she's commenting about it. And then Jasper pulls up his sleeve and shows his entire arm is covered in crescent shaped scars. And the chapter ends with Bella saying, Jasper, what happened to you?
And I was confused because I'm like, we already knew this, but realized that that was Midnight Sun that we knew this and not Twilight. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we were questioning about, so he's just walking around with all the scars. How does that work? But apparently they are conveniently located on his arms, so he can wear long sleeves and no one notices. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Um, yeah. I also like didn't remember all the details of this, and I was like, wait, was Jasper like tortured or something? I was pretty sure it was just from like war stuff, but then I didn't remember. And then remember we were like, what war was he in? Now we know. Vampire wars, not time period
well,
wars.
he also was time period
Yeah.
war. He was in the Confederate Army, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But and I remembered that detail. Yeah. So
Yeah, but not how he got his scars. His
not how
scars
he
are
got the scars. I was confused also about the scars. I couldn't remember exactly. For some reason, like I do remember that he was in like these vampire wars or whatever, but in my mind, I'm like all the scars happened with him turning, and I'm like, why does he have so many bite marks? How is he not dead? But it makes
mm-hmm.
sense that they are battle scars. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So, should we jump into chapter 13?
yeah.
Okay. Most of chapter 13 is going to be about Jasper's story. It starts out with some context explaining the vampire wars of Mexico. Um, and basically how some vampires realized that newborn vampires were super, super strong and like basically very ferocious. Like they were more powerful than other vampires, but they just didn't have any skills. So if you made a ton of new vampires, you could essentially have a vampire army that could overwhelm even really large clans. And this desire for this started um, with the realization that it is easier for a vampire to live by a major city because people don't notice as much when people start going missing and disappear, and you can like get away with hunting easier in big cities. So um yeah, so it starts with this one vampire who wants to start taking over cities. He starts with Houston and then moves down to Mexico. And it becomes this like all out war. The vampire clans in southern Mexico realize that he's got an army of baby vamps and decide the only way to counter that is for them to make an army of baby vamps. And it becomes this huge freaking thing. The Volturi come in and basically kill off all the vampires in Mexico. And from there on out, the Volturi kill most people who are making new baby vampires.
Mm-hmm.
However, we then find out there are some exceptions for people who are doing it smartly and under the radar and not bringing attention to themselves. They let it slide, which leads us into Jasper's story in Texas.
Yeah. No, I just the one thing that I have to comment on that stuff was about Bella like said that she frowned at the way that Jasper pronounced the name of the Volturi with respect and almost gratitude, and how he was making it seem like they were the good guys, which was hard for her to accept, but it does make sense in this context that they were the only ones stopping these southern covens from like killing everybody. So
Yeah, yeah. And that, yeah, like they were the kind of the only hope maybe that Jasper had to get like out of this situation that he was in also.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then we jump into Jasper's life as a human. He is a Confederate soldier who's very charismatic. He gets promoted up in the ranks quickly. And one day he is out on patrol and comes across these three women, which he thinks are in distress. He gets off his horse. It is three vampires who are intending to start building their army and start gaining territory, but they want to do it really smartly. So they're specifically looking for humans that they think will have interesting powers. Um, and they are doing a lot of training with them. And then it seems like we get more information as we go that they're creating a ton of vampires in like a 2 week time period and then training them all, using them until their newborn vampire power runs out, which is anywhere from 1 to 3 years. And then they kill them and create new newborn vampires. Pretty crazy, pretty creepy.
Just a little bit. Yeah, we get
Yeah.
some crazy backstories in this section. It's
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
honestly like this whole section is almost backstories. Like,
Yeah. Literally. Yeah, it's back Rosalie, Jasper, and the werewolf backstory
mhm.
all happen in this one. Um, yeah. So we learn in that time Jasper becomes super valuable to the female vampire who's kind of leading this group of three. She becomes super powerful. She's taking over territories, and she realizes that Jasper is very effective at controlling the newborn vampires and even makes it more effective for her to work with the other two vampires with her. And that there's just like a lot more cohesion and everybody like just things go smoother and the training is better and they're doing better in battle because of Jasper, which we get a lot of sense of that situation in the Midnight Sun version as they're driving to go rescue Bella. And yeah, have debated the almost like extreme levels of emotional like control and them being very synced up and connected also. So we kind of know that those are the skills he either has already during this time or is developing during this time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. However, he ends up befriending one vampire named Peter, um, and they become friends and start working together. And one day, it's like the time for them, the yearly time to go kill off the newborn vampires and start creating the new ones. And they do all this one on one. And Peter intervenes because Jasper is supposed to go kill Charlotte, who you may remember from book one is Jasper's mate. Um,
Peter's mate.
yep, Peter's mate. Sorry, mix the name around there. Yeah, Peter's mate. Um, who are like his first family. Um, yeah. So they end up escaping Charlotte and Peter together. Um, and Jasper is super miserable. He talks about how he is also really impacted by other people's emotions, and being in war constantly in this like super chaotic environment is making him super depressed. And he's like, so miserable, but hasn't really thought there is any other way of life to be a vampire, because this is everything. This is his entire experience as a vampire. He has zero concept that there are clans that get along or that are nomadic or anything like that. And he kind of thinks the only way out is for him to kill the head female of this clan, which he doesn't really want to do, because he says they've been together as long as he's been with like Carlisle, and she's the one who turned him also. So yeah.
Yeah.
uh yeah.
I had a note here about prior to Jasper like telling the story, Bella is talking about how Jasper kind of always seemed like the odd person out of the Cullens, and that she
Mhm.
thought that he was just there because Alice was kind of thing, and that he didn't necessarily want to live the lifestyle that the Cullens are living. But I feel like this point kind of shows that that is good for him to live that lifestyle, because he talks specifically about feeling everything that his prey was feeling, and he lived their emotions as he killed them. And so I am sure that for him it is like hard to kill someone, even if he like obviously loses control sometimes, but um that it is not something that he wants to be doing. So,
Mhm. Yeah. We also get a glimpse right around this section. Eventually, he leaves with Peter and Charlotte, and like goes to live with them. But he talks about how hard it is to have self discipline again. Like he was a really disciplined person and a disciplined like military leader, but he basically got to indulge whatever he wanted the entire time he was living in this like vampire army situation, which we're led to believe is like long time that he's there, you know?
yeah.
Um, so he's like lost that like self discipline and self control because he didn't use it for so long as a vampire, which I think is interesting and kind of their explanation for why it's so much harder for him than the rest of them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah. Then eventually, we find out he meets Alice in this random little hotel, tavern, something like that.
I think it was a diner. I could be wrong though.
Great. That makes
In
sense.
Philadelphia. Yeah,
Okay,
diner. Half empty diner.
great. Yeah, Alice is waiting for him. Surprise, surprise. And he gives his version of them meeting, which is psychotic in the cutest way it could be.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah. And
I thought it was really sweet where he talks about meeting her and smiling down at her and her holding out her hand and him taking it without stopping to make sense of what he was doing. And then he says, for the first time in almost a century, so that's some context, almost a century, I felt
Mhm.
hope, which I was just like, oh, it's so sweet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're so cute. I just love them. Ooh.
Yeah.
And yeah, then um we talk about Jasper talks about meeting the Cullens and him showing up with this crazy little Alice behind him and being covered in all these battle scars and all these things, and then jumps ahead to him being in the family.
And
So,
taking Edward's room and Edward getting kicked out to go live in the garage.
oh yeah, that's Alice. Alice kicks him out. Edward finds all his stuff in the garage. Says your room had the best view. Ah, what a cute little brat. Um, yeah, yeah. Uh, and essentially, then, the Cullens keep talking and start making some connections that maybe the Volturi are actually letting this happen intentionally. And maybe they went down to the south and decided to give one of these vampires creating this newborn army a second chance, but told them to go do it in Seattle in the north. Uh, yeah. So that's kind of that's kind of where we end things.
Yeah. I also there is a note I have about they realize that if they were to get in a fight with the newborns that right now not everybody would survive. So they talk about reaching out to someone else. So they reach out to the vampires that are living up in Alaska. And they say no, actually, they say on a condition, and it's that they can go at all the werewolves because Arena got involved with Laurent more than they were aware of, and she wants revenge on them for killing him, which I'm pretty sure this is not in the movies because I had no memory of this whatsoever. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so there's that. And then it ends the chapter with um Bella realizing that if they get in a fight right now, that someone's going to die. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
kind of an intense place to end for
Yeah.
the this section.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But
Yeah.
again,
But that's it. End of chapter 13. Next Tuesday, we will be back reading chapters 14 through something.
20.
Great. 14 through 20. Yeah, crazy. We'll find out what happens.
We're halfway done already.
Yeah, true. Yeah, what percentage are we through the book? Let's see.
49.
49? Okay.
Mhm.
I don't have to pull up my Kindle then.
Yeah, I have it directly in front of me on the last page that we just read.
Nice. Nice, nice. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, as always, thanks for listening. Uh, feel free to tag us on social media, send us an email with your thoughts. If you didn't notice this lovely hat,
About
it
to point that out since we hadn't addressed it.
yeah, this is the skin of a killer with a little sparkle. This is from our shop. It is quite stretchy. You can kind of see how tall it is, little space. Anyways, I got the brown color
Mm.
for reference. So,
I ordered the black, so and I can't tell on this camera. I guess I can see that it's brown now that you say that, but I did think it was black, but
mm-hmm. Yeah,
mm.
yeah. Yeah. Anyways, so that link is in our Instagram bio if you want to check it out.
Yeah.
And we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Let us know if you want us to do more vampire content after this.
Or just to read all the literature that's referenced in Twilight. Those are our
Either
options.
way, either way, we're leaning away from Y2K dystopian fantasy novels, at
Yeah.
least the YA ones.
All right, everybody. Bye.
Bye!